There are many great characters throughout fiction, and when people have to decide on their favorite, they often have a hard time narrowing it down, pinpointing who their number one is, due to just copious amounts of fun and interesting characters available nowadays. But when I'm faced with this question, there's one that will always come up in the end, and I'm not gonna lie, he comes up quite easily. And this character is Kamado Tanjiro. Yes, I know that this is like a Jujutsu Kaisen Tokyo Ghoul channel, and there are many characters from both of these series that most here would agree on being better than Tanjiro. But in my opinion, I like Tanjiro more than almost any character in existence. And in this video, I will be going over why I find Kamado Tanjiro to be such an enticing and amazing protagonist of his own series, and explaining why I connect with him the most out of any character I've seen in fiction. I will say that there are going to be massive manga spoilers in this video, so with that warning aside, let's begin. I want to start off this essay with the introduction to Demon Slayer through chapter 1, a chapter that embodies every aspect of both Demon Slayer as a series, and Tanjiro himself that I find so appealing. As Tanjiro handles his daily business at the village and decides to head back home, a fellow villager essentially begs Tanjiro to stay at his home due to his fear of demons potentially coming out and attacking Tanjiro during the night, and thus, Tanjiro stays at the villager's house, and when morning comes, he sets out to get back home, coming home to find his family slaughtered by a demon, and Nezuko being the only survivor at the brink of death. What this conveys is that had the farmer never even thought of sharing his home with Tanjiro, this story would have never even taken place. The villager asks Tanjiro multiple times to stay with him in fear of the demons, and Tanjiro's consideration of the villager's loneliness due to the villager losing his own family result in them displaying empathy for one another, and Tanjiro survives Muzan's wrath due to him not making it home but staying with the villager. To me, this is what Demon Slayer is about, empathy, and when or how the author believes it should be properly displayed. From Tanjiro helping his fellow villagers, to him having to fight off Nezuko despite not wanting to Gyu expressing his frustration with Tanjiro over his weakness, calling Tanjiro a meek fool for leaving himself wide open in front of him by bowing for the sake of sparing his sister. Gyu explains to Tanjiro that when it comes to demons, he needs to be ruthless, because no matter the circumstances, they will not respect him or his begging, and for that matter, Gyu chooses to not respect Tanjiro himself for displaying such weakness. Gyu goes on to even say more harsh things, and despite that, he thinks this as he convinces himself to kill Nezuko. Do not cry, do not despair, those things will do you no good. Your family is dead and your sister has become a demon. I know your pain, how you want to cry out. If I'd come a half day sooner, your family might have survived, but there's no turning back time. Fill your heart with anger, strong, pure anger, that gives no quarter. Anger that becomes the unwavering force that drives your limbs. Weakness and empty promises cannot protect your sister or find her a cure, and they can certainly not avenge your family. Gyu serves in this chapter to explain that simply being good and kind is not enough, and you must have power to make your ambitions come to fruition. And this is only chapter 1. As the story progresses, we walk this tightrope of empathy, cruelty, and power in an attempt to find an answer through Tanjiro, whose selflessness and kindness knows no bounds. The boy is willing to do anything to save his sister, and eventually more than just her. As we follow Tanjiro, he eventually defeats a weak demon and leaves his head axed into a tree, and he's unsure as to how he can properly finish it off. He decides on crushing its head with a rock, but he just couldn't do it. In the face of such evil, why not ruthlessly kill it? Rokodaki points it out quite simply. He holds way too much sympathy and consideration at this point, and because of these qualities of his, he's useless as a demon slayer. This seems as if it's an obvious reminder of Tanjiro's strongest qualities, but I believe it shows that rather than Orokodaki writing this off as weakness and painting it in a negative light, it's displaying the burden that Tanjiro will always have to carry on this journey of his. Tanjiro will always have to kill these monsters that he holds empathy for, because he knows they were once human. But this burden does get lighter as he comes to realize that he's helping these demons by killing them, and setting them free from Muzan's grasp. And something to mention here is that his empathy does guide him to victory many times in battle. In fact, one can even say that Tanjiro could have never defeated Muzan without it. Tanjiro's empathy towards his enemies is displayed multiple times through the series, such as when he sees a mother spider refusing to fight back upon her death, and so he chooses to give her a painless death by shifting his arts mid-air, and how he cuts off the head of the drum demon, telling him that his blood demon art was beautiful so he can die with the satisfaction that he's never obtained, or best displayed in my opinion, against Akaza, where he decides to punch Akaza in the face because he has no other choices left. This fist reminds Akaza of the fist of love he used to obtain from his master, and thus empathy reaches him and he removes himself from the battle. I've always found the fist that Tanjiro threw at Akaza to be endearing, because if you remember, whenever Tanjiro needed to discipline his fellow humans, he was just as firm with beating them up as he was with killing demons. As he beat down both of his best friends with his bare hands the day he met them and crushed Genga's arm due to him being stubborn, to me, Tanjiro's fist reaching Akaza did not only serve as a reminder of empathy, but a reminder of the absolute strength that comes with such empathy. Akaza declaring himself the loser of the battle due to Tanjiro's willingness to confront him head on and announce that he'd be facing him off, alongside the technique he's declared to be bold and masterful, just makes his defeat even more powerful. It's a strange way to work Tanjiro's kindness, honesty, and strength all into one moment, such as Akaza's defeat, but it still works. Tanjiro's empathy do not only bear results against enemies, but towards his friends and comrades as well. His kindness and interpersonal communication skills is what has allowed him to even have a chance against Muzan in the 12 Moons in the first place. For example, when Genga is on the brink of death fighting against Kokushibo in this arc, believing that he can't contribute anything to the battle they're in, he thinks of Tanjiro. Now, Tanjiro once told him that the weakest character on the battlefield has the greatest potential to shift the tides of battle. Since the opponents see them as a non-factor, they can catch them off guard by taking advantage of this, and this is what led to the victory over Kokushibo. Tanjiro's single attempt to encourage Genga and make him feel better in that instance led all the way up to Genga defeating Kokushibo in the future. Where there's another flashback of when Tanjiro explains to Inosuke that he has a mother, and despite her never being in his life, she certainly loved him very much, serving as closure to his battle with Doma, the man who separated him from his mother when he was born. There are many instances when moments such as these take place throughout the story, and the weight of such words being displayed through this way is, in my opinion, a very strong way to display how far such small words can take others in life, and how much you can help them this way. It's powerful, constantly reminding the reader to display empathy to others whenever they can. Another aspect of Tanjiro I find so endearing is his strength to move forward no matter the circumstances, and his ability to remain composed in the presence of others, such as after the defeat of the Shadow Demon. Tanjiro asks if the villager's okay, to which the villager says obviously not due to losing a loved one. Tanjiro, once being in his shoes, tells him straight up that he needs to continue moving forward no matter how many bad things happen to him. And in response to this, the villager gets extremely frustrated, asking him, what does he know? He's only a child. Tanjiro puts his hand on the wrist of the villager while giving him a smile and gives him something of his loved one that has recently passed, asking him to remember her by it, and he just continues to move forward onto his next mission. The villager puts it together that Tanjiro knows his pain and that he suffered the same way he has, and thus he begins to apologize profusely. Tanjiro simply turns around and waves goodbye, continuing on his journey to do the same thing all over again. This has always stood out as a strong indicator of Tanjiro's strength to me, because he doesn't ever really lament, lay down and cry, or anything when it comes to his constant suffering. He suffers very silently through the constant PTSD of seeing his dead mother and siblings, taking the lives of the demons that he sympathizes for, losing comrades, and witnessing the same loss come to others over and over again, something he's committed himself to preventing. He always continues to push forward, doing his best to help everybody in every way despite all the suffering he needs to deal with. He doesn't even feel the need to speak about himself to convey a point either, showcasing high emotional intelligence. Both Tanjiro's empathy and strength as a person are parts of himself that stand out to me the most, and why I connect with this character more than most others. It's nuanced, yet conveyed very easily and well. Here, I want to move on to Tanjiro's blade and the significance of it. When Tanjiro passes the final selection exam and the craftsman of his blade comes to drop off his blade, the craftsman explains to Tanjiro that he's a child of brightness, these children of brightness coming from houses that work with fire. And you can easily identify these children by their reddish eyes and hair. It's said that, due to this, he has a good fortune and should be able to draw a red blade. But Tanjiro does not. Instead, he draws a black blade, the same as Yoriichi Sugikuni. Now, the red blade is cherished because of its strength. You can only trigger a red blade through first having the Demon Slayer mark, a mark that massively enhances your physical capabilities in exchange for your life force, passing away before you're 25 in most cases. And combining this enhanced strength from the mark with the method of raising the blade's temperature, you come out with a red blade. And although all this sounds convoluted, everything you do to obtain a red blade is worth it, as it's the only blade that can actually slay Muzan, the entire purpose of a demon slayer in the first place. You cannot achieve your goal without reaching this point, so take note here that Tanjiro never obtains his blade on his own. In chapter 10, it's said that the significance of the Black Blade is said to be unknown due to very few people in history ever having it. So few people have had this blade that it's assumed that they were unsuccessful swordsmen, implying that they failed and died early on in their journeys. As mentioned earlier, Yoriichi is the only character we know who has had the Black Blade, and as the series goes on, it's put together that this blade represents the wielders of the sun-breathing technique, the technique that was perfected upon a realization of its purpose of eradicating Muzan Kibutsuji. Something I need to say about this blade is that I do believe that it represents failure, as Yoriichi had failed in his purpose to kill Muzan, and Tanjiro had failed in his mastery of the sun-breathing and killing Muzan alone. It allows us to see their red blades as indicators of their success, as Yoriichi had activated his red blade upon completing the entire sun-breathing form, and Tanjiro activated his red blade only with the help of Giyu in pinning Muzan down for good. I want to say that where Tanjiro succeeded is an indicator of where Yoriichi failed, but I wouldn't ever consider his loss against Muzan to be a complete failure, and in fact, this loss has only made Tanjiro a stronger character to me. And here's why. When Kokushibo speaks about Yoriichi during their childhood, he explains that Yoriichi had clung on to his mother for most of his life, and he pitied him for doing so. In truth, Yoriichi had seen that his mother's left side was weak, and thus served as support for her to be able to walk. Yoriichi had never spoken as children, and thus everybody around him believed that he was deaf. The first time that Yoriichi decides to speak, he could speak with such elegance that is surprising to Kokushibo, and not only that, he asks about his brother's dreams. He does not speak for himself, but he speaks for the people around him, and once he's able to understand his brother's dream, he wants to support him by becoming the second best, and thus he attempts to practice swordsmanship. But upon obliterating his opponent, he drops it completely, finding the idea of inflicting harm onto others to be intolerable. Yoriichi, despite having unparalleled swords talent, gave up swordsmanship and his dream for the sake of others, and he did this as a child. Yoriichi and Kokushibo's father still wanted Yoriichi to pursue swordsmanship despite that, and thus, Yoriichi was going to inherit the temple that they inhabited, while Kokushibo was going to be sent away from the household. This would render Kokushibo's dream of becoming the greatest swordsman null. Yoriichi, upon finding out what his father was going to do, alongside his mother passing away, makes the decision to completely desert the temple, and goes on to meet a girl that he lives with for a very long time. Eventually they grow up, and they're going to have a child, but he leaves to find a midwife, only to come back and find that she's been slaughtered by a demon. Upon seeing this, he simply sits by the side of his wife for 10 days straight, the mourning only coming to an end when he's found by someone of the Demon Slayer Corp. After properly mourning their deaths, he joins the Demon Slayer Corp and teaches everything he knows about swordsmanship to them. And as Yoriichi eventually creates the Breath of the Sun, nobody else can replicate what he can do, and so they had to create their own forms. Fire, water, wind, stone, thunder, these are all children of the sun-breathing technique. After bestowing and sharing his knowledge with those around him for the sake of protecting both them and the world more efficiently, he comes across his brother once more, and begins to train him in the art of breathing techniques and demon slaying. Kokushibo, if you remember, was a jealous and selfish child upon realizing Yoriichi's talent and strength, and these traits only grew as Kokushibo grew himself. And as we move past Kokushibo, Yoriichi comes across Muzan. Upon finally meeting him, he states that he had been born for the purpose of killing this man, and little did he know, he had already achieved said purpose, just not in the way he believed. Yoriichi failed to completely defeat Muzan. His brother had become a demon, he lost his family, and now what does he have left? The future. Yoriichi still left behind all of his teachings for multiple demon slayers to protect many people for generations to come, and yet he was still able to convince himself that his failure would result in many more people dying. And what convinces Yoriichi otherwise, what allows him to understand the meaning of his own life, was the loving smile of another person. This same smile that Tanjiro displays to others throughout the entire series. Yoriichi departs after displaying the sun-breathing techniques and gives Sumiyoshi, Tanjiro's ancestor, the earrings he wore himself. If you remember, Yoriichi considers gifts to be an extension of oneself. This is why he refers to the flute that Kokushibo gave him as children as Kokushibo himself. He He does the same here. Sumiyoshi declares that Yoriichi's life was never without value, and to never convince yourself of this. They will carry on his legacy, and thus, they did. They weren't the only ones to carry on his legacy though. Giyu, Sanemi, Zenitsu, Hiyome, and everyone else did as well, as they are all the culmination of Yoriichi's efforts in the past. But despite Yoriichi being a vastly superior version of Tanjiro, why did Tanjiro succeed in killing Muzan where Yoriichi could not? And I'll simply say that Tanjiro had many powerful comrades alongside him. Had Tanjiro fought Muzan alone for any longer, Muzan would have simply walked away from him and escaped. The story makes it a point that Muzan could never be defeated alone, and Yoriichi convincing himself that this was his purpose led to nowhere but an empty depression. This is what convinces me that Tanjiro's black blade, the same one Yoriichi once held, naturally turning red in Tanjiro's hands for the one and only time was when he and Giyu were holding it together. It displays the answer to all of their work. Everything Yoriichi has left behind and everything that Tanjiro had worked hard to nurture and preserve. And now that we've talked a bit about Yoriichi, I want to speak about Kokushibo himself and how he parallels both Tanjiro and Yoriichi's characters, allowing us to understand them even more. When Kokushibo speaks to Yoriichi about potential successors and those around them as not even being comparable to them, Yoriichi dismisses this, telling him that we are no more than fragments of a long history. The man who thought that he was above the rest left nothing behind, abandoning his family, dignity, not even finding satisfaction in a decision that he's ever made, was ironically at peace when he put his efforts towards nurturing his own child, the future. Whereas those who are selfless were able to influence not only themselves, but the entire world, and to live on through others no matter what. I think this is why Tanjiro was never the one to meet or fight Kokushibo directly. His efforts with connecting with these characters and helping them grow as people throughout the entire story led up to his comrades trusting and protecting one another, valuing their lives, and becoming strong enough to fight Kokushibo on their own. In a way, Tanjiro does indirectly defeat Kokushibo with what Kokushibo has been missing his entire life: trust, empathy, and companionship. That look on Tanjiro's face when Kokushibo asks why does the sun breathing persist despite his efforts to eradicate it has always moved me. He thinks of Tanjiro as he questions his purpose, why he can never leave anything behind, why he could not become someone. He never thought outside of himself, and as humans are social creatures, that never ends well. His selfishness lived to perfect his form for hundreds of years, yet it's become an uncontrollable, calamitous mess with over 15 styles that requires the use of a 15-foot blade. It's a mess of a style that can never be passed on from its original user. Tanjiro is a character who carries the past efforts of everyone before him and someone who cultivates and nurtures the present for the sake of his sister, whereas Kokushibo was a character who was possessed by jealousy, abandoning everything and everyone for the sake of surpassing his brother. Tanjiro protected and saved many for his goals, whereas Kokushibo took the lives of thousands, and possibly even more for the sake of his. Only one of the two were ever going to reincarnate, and only one of the two would ever reach their goals. And I do think that it's important to point out that Kokushibo did love his brother despite the jealousy, but getting into their own fully in-depth dynamic should be its own video. Another major character that makes Tanjiro shine even brighter to me is Muzan Kibutsuji. My take on him is going to be quite obvious, yet contrived the most, and I'll be saying it anyway. Muzan is a very bland character, so bland that it's ridiculous, and yet, I believe that this is his purpose. When Tanjiro meets Muzan for the final time, he states that he is not a being that should exist, and he goes on to never display any empathy or sympathy or even attempts at doing so when it comes to Muzan, because Muzan is so evil that he's in a way correct when he considers himself to be a natural disaster. It's unrealistic how evil and selfish he is, convincing himself that what he's doing is the natural state of all things and such. Nothing like Muzan could ever exist in the real world, and because of that, he does not deserve any empathy or even a real backstory. There are nuanced characters who deserve varying levels of empathy and understanding, and the only one who does not deserve as such is Muzan. A pest, so stubborn in his desperate will to survive that he'd even forsake his own narcissistic ideals in an attempt to continue his own legacy in the form of Tanjiro. But again, companionship and selflessness prevailed, with Kanao giving up an eye for the sake of killing off Muzan for good. In the end, Demon Slayer seems to be a story about what it truly means to be selfless without being a fool, and the impact that such a behavior has on the world. And Tanjiro's journey of helping others, culminating into his own goal of saving his sister, does a great job at conveying this for me. Tanjiro puts others before himself, just enough to where it's kind but not stupid, And the same applies to the empathy that he displays. And this is why he's always been my favorite character. He's a prime example of what it truly means to be the strongest. Well, thank you so much for watching the video, guys. I guess I want to end the video on this note. In an age where people are more narcissistic and selfish than ever, I think that Demon Slayer was well ahead of its time. A lot of people tend to have this ideology that they're the main character and that they're more special than everybody else. And Demon Slayer, through its messages of empathy, sacrifice, and companionship, throws all that out the window. I love that it emphasizes that Yoriichi couldn't really accomplish all of his goals alone, but instead, everything he did for others was what led up to Muzan's defeat. Giving, everybody breathing styles, showing empathy for Lady Tamayo. Everything Yoriichi did for others was what led to Muzan's defeat, and I think that's beautiful. We really need messages like that out nowadays because I swear everybody just thinks they're the main character, man. I don't get it. It's just making the world worse and worse by the day. Nobody does anything for other people anymore, and we see the results of that. With that being said, I'm gonna say it again. Demon Slayer was ahead of its time. And I'm gonna stand on that because a lot of people want to see one guy do it all and crazy, amazing fights, and that's never the point. That was never the point of Demon Slayer. Anyways, if you watched all the way through, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And with that being said, guys, peace out.